Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the channel, and on today's video we're going to talk about the long run. And look, before we get started, I do have to say that I'm not a coach, so I am certainly not giving you any advice in this video. However, I have run a few long runs in my life, so I guess mainly I'm going to be talking about my experience, what I do, but me just saying what I do is no fun for anyone, so I definitely want to hear from you. Because this is just the intro, I don't know what I'm going to ask you yet, but it's going to be something long run related. Anyway, let's get into it. Alright guys, I came across an article in the Marathon Handbook, or marathonhandbook.com, and that article is titled How You're Screwing Up Your Long Runs and How to Get It Right. Look, I think all of us want to get it right, even though I think sometimes it feels like we're never getting it right, or not all right, maybe just a little bit right. Sometimes a little bit right is enough. Gosh, 30 seconds in, I'm already rambling. Okay, but let's get down to the facts. I think the long run is probably the most important run of the week. Agree? Disagree? Let me know. And that is because the long run is designed to build endurance. I think we can all agree on that. And of course, there's a couple of different ways you can approach the long run, and I guess it depends on what kind of distance you're going for. But basically, if I had to boil it down, I'd say a long run is just a run that's longer than your normal run. So let's say you're training for a 5K. Well, your long run could be 5-6 miles. If you're training for a half marathon, perhaps you'll get up to the 13-mile mark. And of course, if you're training for a marathon, you will probably get up to 20, 21, maybe 22. Generally, I like to keep it around 20 just because I've run a few marathons and I haven't noticed a better improvement if I run past 20. I also have run a few marathons where I've only run up to 18 miles. And in those races, I didn't notice any performance decline. But I do have to say that if I run 20 miles, there's just something mentally pleasing about that distance. And if you track your runs by kilometers, you're probably going to have to come up with another mentally pleasing number. So 20 miles is about 32 kilometers. So actually, I don't know. If you track your runs using kilometers, I want to know what is a long run to you. Or I should say, I want to know what a long run when you're training for a marathon is. Do you do 30 kilometers? Do you do 35 kilometers? Drop a comment, let me know. So on marathonhandbook.com, they've got several coaches that write articles. So we're getting a lot of first-hand information from a coaching perspective. And in this particular article, they note that a very popular question is when runners write in saying, look, the training plan says that I have to run my long runs at a slow, easy, conversational pace, but that feels too slow. How am I going to run my race at race pace if I'm not practicing my long runs at race pace? And I guess the concern is that you're going to get stuck slow, or you're going to become so accustomed to running slow that you can't run fast when you need to. And I'm probably going to say this several times during the video, but to repeat myself already, the long run is to build endurance, or ultimately to build endurance. So when you get to race day, you can cover the distance, especially at the marathon. And I say especially at the marathon because when you're training for a marathon, it's unlikely that you're going to be running that actual race distance before the race. And I'm sure it's the same with a half marathon. I've never actually followed a half marathon training plan to the letter, but I kind of doubt that most half marathon training plans will have you running 13 miles in training. But for distances less than that, the 5K, the 10K, you're definitely going to be running that distance as your long run. So ultimately covering the distance in the race is no big deal. So we're really talking about marathon training. Now, the article does point out for beginner and intermediate runners, and they classify beginner and intermediate runners as those with less than 5 years of running under their belts. And I say 5 years of running, they actually say 5 years of continuous steady distance running. And if you've got less than 5 years of ongoing steady distance running under your belt, your body isn't going to be accustomed to running those longer distances. Although when I read that, it did kind of make me scratch my head because I actually went out for a long run this morning and I can tell you that it felt like my body wasn't accustomed to it. And the coach in the article wants to point out that these runs, these long runs that we're doing, they're not taking place in a vacuum. And that means that that's not the only thing going on. Usually these long runs are part of a structured training program. And as you know, if you've ever trained for a race, that training program tends to get pretty intense, like right before the taper. When I'm training for a marathon and I'm following an actual plan, it definitely seems like by the time I'm approaching the taper that I can't continue with that level of intensity much longer. So ultimately what the coach is saying is that when you're doing your long runs, you are probably doing them tired, or at least you're doing them more tired than you will be on race day. Because race day is the only time that if you're following a training plan, you're actually going to have an elongated time where you're going to be resting, where you're going to be running less, the taper, so you can peak on race day. And then even though that you have been doing your long runs and you're probably doing your long runs a little tired because of everything else that's going on, the next week is right behind it and you're probably going to have a workout within a day or two of that long run. So you're going to be going into that workout with tired legs. So I guess what the coach is actually getting at is if you're doing your long runs at a slow, easy, conversational pace, not to worry. Even if it feels easy, it's not easy. You're still putting the work in. Because on race day, everything is just going to click, or at least that's the design. You're going to be rested, you're going to be well fed, you're going to have better sleep, and we can't underestimate the excitement, the adrenaline that comes on race day, right? That really counts for a lot. Now, there's a couple different ways to do your long runs, and you may see some people on Strava, and if you see these people doing this, you might be tempted to do it yourself, but these people will go out and they will run a vast portion, maybe all of their long run at their race pace. And just from my perspective, I don't know how they do that. I think that is absolutely crazy. I could not go out and run run my marathon race pace on a training run. You know, maybe I could do a couple of miles at race pace, but it's just a different motivation. It's a different motivation, and I've got that accumulated fatigue that comes from training. All right, so if you're one of those people that's worried about going out on your long run and running really slow, don't worry, it's not going to make that big of a difference when it actually comes to race day, because you've already been training speed. You've just been doing it at a different time than your long run. Which brings me to the next part, where the coach mentions about two different muscle groups, and we've got the endurance muscles and we've got the speed muscles. And we already mentioned those people that train both at the same time if they go out and they're actually running a race pace workout for their long run. But if you're worried about that, don't worry, because that's not most people. Most people are going to separate their long run and their speed work, right? You could definitely try to combine them for a little bit, but if you keep doing it too long, you are going to hurt yourself. I don't want to say it's guaranteed, because I'm sure there's some unicorns out there that could actually do it. So I'll just talk for me. As someone that is not a unicorn, I could not do it. I would definitely hurt myself. So then what else are we left with? We've got our shorter workouts during the week where we're going to be running race pace and maybe faster than race pace. And then we've got our long run. You might be able to do a long run every week. Just because of how my schedule is, I generally do a proper long run every 2 weeks. And then on my down weeks, I can usually run a long run of up to about 13 miles. And while I found myself kind of worried about doing that, about not doing a long run every week, I've actually found overall I feel better, because that down week is allowing me to recover. Okay, but just because I'm doing that doesn't mean it's going to work for you. If you have questions, maybe see a coach. Saying that, if you're using one of these free plans from the internet, most of them have a long run every single week. So do you ever wonder about what kind of pace you should be running your long runs at? I mean, it's actually not something I really think about now, because I generally go with the talk test. Or if I'm on my own, just what seems really easy. So I've got to keep my heart rate nice and low. But I know that actually having a number can be comforting. So a lot of coaches recommend between 1 and 3 minutes slower than your 10K race pace for shorter races, maybe 5K, 10K, half marathon, and then between 1 and 2 minutes slower than your race pace for the marathon. And of course, for those of you that do track your runs in kilometers, your easy run pace should be between 50 and 90 seconds slower than your marathon race pace. Now for me, I'm definitely on the slower end of that spectrum. I think if I were to just fall into my normal easy run, long run pace, I would be between 1.5 to 2 minutes slower than my marathon time. So for me, at least, that formula kind of fits. Okay, so let's say you're going out for your long run and you're going out for a long, easy, slow distance, right? That's generally what most people do. I've been running for quite a long time now, and that's generally what I do. My long runs are long and slow, and I just like it. Or I shouldn't say I like it, because when I'm in the middle of it, it doesn't really feel like I like it. But what I do like is not running any faster at the end. But sometimes it's good to run faster at the end, and that would be a fast finish long run. So the idea behind this is to combine the two, combine a little bit of speed with your long run. So you go out, you run the majority of your miles at an easy pace, and maybe that last 30% you pick up the pace to race pace. Or it doesn't even have to be race pace. Just picking up the pace from your long, slow distance is going to have big benefits. It's going to teach you to turn your legs over a little quicker when you're feeling tired. And in my experience, when I do these, I end up feeling pretty good. It feels good to put in the work, even if it admittedly doesn't feel good at the time. Next, we've got back-to-back long runs. Now, I actually don't know where the science stands on this, but sometimes if you just don't have the time, you could do back-to-back long runs. And the idea behind that is to get in a good amount of distance, and then the next day get in another good amount of distance. Maybe not as long as you would run in one time, but you're running as long as you can on one day. You're probably held back by time, and then the next day you're running on tired legs. And that is a great way to get in distance if you don't have the time to log it all in one time. I've said time way too much. Anyway, I think this is especially good if you are an ultra runner, because if you are running an ultra marathon, you're going to be out there for hours and hours. Well, as a marathon runner, you're going to be out there for hours and hours. As an ultra runner, you're going to be out there for hours and hours and hours. So for those back-to-back long runs, that's generally when I'm training for an ultra. And of course, the distance can vary depending on your time, your experience, what distance you're training for. I think I remember seeing some training plans at some point that did have back-to-back runs instead of like one big long run. But I think if I was nailed down just on my experience, I think getting your long run in one time, I think that's the best. At least it's the best for me. Next up, we've got the progression long run, and this is always a really satisfying run to do. Although with that said, I've never actually done my long run as a progression. I always start out just really slow and then chug along. Like if I'm going to do any kind of workout on a long run, it's going to be the fast finish. But a progression long run is fantastic because it teaches you to run faster as you get tireder as the run goes on. And as you all know, the very best way to run a race is with a negative split, where you run the second half faster than the first half. And as all marathon world records have been run in this way, it's probably a strategy to take a second look at. Still, it's not something I do. When I go out for a progression run, I'll probably keep it to about 10 miles, and it's always a fun run to do, but I don't go out for an actual long run. Anyway, you could. And that's one of the ideas that the Marathon Handbook suggests. And finally, we've got the interval long run. And that's where we are including some race pace intervals sprinkled in throughout the long run. So for example, you could warm up for a couple of kilometers, then do 2 kilometers at race pace, 1 kilometer easy, 2 kilometers at race pace, 1 kilometer easy, and just continue as long as you like. And the beauty of that is you can tweak the work time and the rest time to fit whatever training goals you have. That actually sounds like a fun one. Of course, really challenging, but that sounds fun. Okay, so now I want to hear from you. If you want to actually give me a distance of your long run, I'd love to hear it. And what is your favorite kind of long run to do. Remember, we've got the long, slow, easy, we've got the fast finish, we've got the progression, and we have the interval long run. Oh, and if we're talking about long runs, it probably means that you're training for something, or if you're not signed up for anything, you've got something in the back of your mind that you're planning. Drop a comment and let me know what it is. All right, guys, that's it for this week. It's Matt B. This has been a chat about long runs. Maybe my favorite kind of run. Anyway, be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.